Good morning, everyone. How are we all doing today? There seems to be a little concern over the news that Apple is, they call it retiring their official Final Cut Pro training. So, we're going to talk about it today. We got a comment from Justine Paula Robillard in South Africa. Hi, Richard. Just put the kettle on for coffee, just a hair over 5 p.m. here in South Africa. Yeah, so coffee as well. $10 p.m. here on the East Coast of the good old USA. So let's talk about, let me just close these up real quick. All the images are all over my desktop. Let's talk about what's going on. So Apple has certified training for Final Cut Pro. It's had a program in effect for a long time. I got certified training from Apple themselves in New York, at their HQ in New York, back with version 5. Back in those days, Apple was running the training for the Pro apps. They were running it themselves. They haven't been doing that for a long time. There's been a third party that has been running the program, and it's not been very good. The program has not been very effective. I don't think attendance has been good. I know the trainers themselves have not been satisfied with it, me being one. I refused to sign their contract that they wanted us to sign. So the program itself has been in decline, I would say. It's not been effective. It's been in decline. Attendance has been down. There's fewer sessions, a bunch of other things. Now, typically, the difference is this time it's a little different. What's happened? Apple, I'm saying Apple, the people in charge of the training at Apple, whatever division that is, first off, I think they have next to no contact with the Final Cut Pro team at Apple. That's my opinion. I don't think they talk to them at all. They just do their own thing, and they're completely independent. First off, they hired a third-party company to run the training. Can you imagine Apple saying, hey, we're going to run a third-party company to run the Final Cut Pro division of Apple? No, you could not. I don't think there's very little contact between the two groups. That's number one. Typically what happens is this. Apple puts out a new version of Final Cut Pro. Let's say say we're on version 2, Apple puts out version 3. Usually, there's a version, the version 2 exam and certification have been ongoing. Once version 3 comes out, Final Cut Pro 10.3, say, about a year later, after those two have overlapped, they will retire Final Cut Pro 10.2 exam and Final Cut Pro courseware and trainer exam and stuff. About a year overlap between the old version and between the existing version and the older version. Well, we heard from the program, not Apple official, not the Final Cut Pro team. They have not been involved in these communications, that they are dropping the Final Cut Pro 10.4 training. So this time is different because they're dropping the training with no replacement. In the past, when they dropped the training, there's always been a replacement version coming out, a new version of Final Cut Pro. This time, they have not done that. Now, there could be several reasons, more than one. If they think there's just one reason, you have to expand your imagination. So the main reason the trainers on the train, we have a private trainers group on Facebook, and I put up a poll what they thought was happening here a few days ago, and everybody said that Apple is just dropping the training. That's the only thing that's happening. Apple is dropping the training. Okay, so that's number one. Dropping, I'm going to write these down. Dropping Pro Apps training, because it also included Logic Pro, not just Final Cut Pro. So most of the trainers think that Apple is just dropping the training, and they would say for a good reason. It's not been effective, poor attendance, disgruntled trainers for years because of this third party, the way that they're running things. When Apple ran it, it was certainly better. There was a drop-off in training from Final Cut Pro 7 to Final Cut Pro 10. There absolutely was. I've been teaching Final Cut Pro as a certified trainer since version 5. Like I said, I got trained by Apple themselves in New York, and I can't remember when that was. Whenever version 5 came out, I was a trainer. I've been a trainer ever since then, and I'm now a trainer for 10.4. That doesn't change because Apple's dropping the course and dropping the exam. I'm still an Apple certified trainer for 10.4, period. All the trainers are still trainers for whatever version they're trained for. So here's this, like I said, this time is different. This time there's usually an overlap between one version, the old version, and a new version, anywhere from from a year to 18 months. This time there's nothing to replace it. So it seems like Apple is dropping Pro Apps training. Well, they are for the current version of training. Yes, they are. That's the best we can see. We got an official notice. Tangier says, is there a link to the announcement? Just arrived. There's no announcement that's been public from Apple. This information comes from a trainers group, a private Final Cut Pro Apps, Apple certified trainers group. And Pauline says, I have not been able to confirm this information. Apple doesn't typically make these announcements when they're retiring a program. Not Apple. And when I say Apple, I don't mean Apple at large. I'm talking about just the training program. They don't make these announcements public. They just drop the course and have a new course. So it looked pretty official. What I saw looked pretty official. And it said that they said, the way they put it, they're retiring FCPX 10.4 and Logic Pro 10.4 training exams and trainer exams. That's another thing, the trainer exams, in June of this year. Normally that's normal. This time it's not because there's nothing to replace them. There's no version 10.5 yet. Now, so the main thing that the trainers think is Apple's dropping the training. Not a surprise. The training has not been good for years. That part is not a surprise. Training has not been good. The trainers have been dissatisfied, low attendance, few classes, etc. And the other thing was the third party was running it, not Apple themselves. So Tamaz says new version of FCPX won't have official training support. Now, I'm not saying that. I am not saying that. I think it will have support. I think that at some point, now what form that support is, I don't know. This program that exists now is being retired. They're still doing training for Mac OS. They're still doing other kind of training. I don't know who's handling that. I'm not involved with that kind of training. But let's continue on. So typically there's an overlap. This time there's no overlap. Okay? At this point, we're fairly confident that there's a new version of Final Cut Pro that's going to be available in 2020. So Jean-Baptiste says, or maybe a brand new FCPX 11. Well, listen, at some point there's going to be a new version of Final Cut Pro that's not perhaps called 10, that doesn't have the X associated with it, whether that's 11, whether that's Final Cut something else, whether it's a new name, a new app, whatever, there's going to be a new version. I don't know if that's coming now. So Final Cut Pro in 10 was studying for my FCPX cert. Do I stop? No. There's no reason to stop. Do you want the certification for Final Cut Pro 10.4? Get it. Absolutely. There's no reason to stop. Like I said, I've had it since 10.5. I've had all the certifications. When Final Cut Pro 10 came out, there was a brand new exam, brand new books. This is what always happens. This time, I'm not sure why they even made that available to their trainers and the training centers. I'm not sure if they have no statement. Now, once again, this is not Apple. This is not Apple corporate. This is a small section of Apple, the training section. I don't think they have very much communication with the Final Cut Pro team. It doesn't seem like it to me. Why would you, if it was part of the Final Cut Pro team, why would you lend it out to a third party to take care of? So we have one thing. They're dropping the existing training. They're dropping the existing training for 10.4, both Final Cut Pro and for Logic. That's what it seems to be. I've seen it. I'm not going to post it because I'm not going to post the actual notice. I think somebody else has on Twitter. You can go there and look. I'm posting the information because it's important for Final Cut Pro users to know. When there was concern about the last Mac Pro we had, the cylinder Mac Pro, right? What did Apple do? Apple brought together a group of professionals and talked to them and listened to them. And then what came out? We got the 2019 Mac Pro, which is way above and beyond what anybody expected. Okay? If Apple is going to continue doing training, and I really can't see them not doing, I can't see a new version of Final Cut Pro come out with zero training. I can't see that. Other people think that this is the end of the training. Well, that's their view of the training. That's not my view. That's one option, is there's going to be no more training. I don't think so. I think that they will be some form of training. It could be free training. Apple could provide free training on the internet. You sign up, you take a course online. It could be in the Apple stores. The idea that there'll be no training for a new version of Final Cut Pro, to me, doesn't seem realistic. So keep that in mind. So number two is, I think there's going to be training, just not the way it's being done right now. The way it's being done right now has not succeeded. Remember Apple had Mobile Me? Remember Apple had iTunes? Well, they dropped those and replaced it with something else. I'm not sure how much Tim Cook is aware of this situation, but some people are, I'm sure. Justine says the training needs to test creative ability as well as technical, both. never tested creative ability. I would pay a couple $100 US for a new certificate. So Simeon says, at this point, maybe at NAB show, a brand new version of Final Cut Pro would be shown. That's what I'm expecting. Before NAB or by NAB, I think a new version of Final Cut Pro will be out. People say, oh, you're guessing. Yeah, I'm guessing. I'm guessing that the sun's going to come up tomorrow too, I guess, right? So a new version of Final Cut Pro 10.4 is 26 months old at this point. So a new version absolutely is due in 2020. They've had 5 versions, full number versions of Final Cut Pro. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 of those 5 versions, the full number versions, have been announced at or around NAB or the FCPX Creative Summit. The only one that wasn't announced around one of those major events was 10.1, and that came out in December. There was no events to be announced around. I fully expect 10.5, or whatever the new version is going to be called, will be announced right before NAB, between now and NAB, or right at NAB itself. What do you think? Does that sound like something that is likely to happen? So the idea that 10.5 comes out and there's no official training for it sounds like, if that happened, it's like leaving a hole in the Final Cut Pro workflow. I mean, training is important. If you hire somebody and you say, how did you learn Final Cut Pro? And they say, oh, I taught myself. Or if you hired somebody and you say, oh, I got Apple certification for it, plus I taught myself, plus I have some experience, it just sounds better. I've hired people when I worked at the National Archives. I've hired people. Both people that I hired as editors had Final Cut Pro training. Both of them. They also had Final Cut Pro experience, editing experience as well. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But they also had training. One of them was a trainer herself, just like myself. Justine says, Apple announces with enough time, hell's bells, I will be in California. Take a risk. Tamaz says, FCPX is a professional application and should have official professional training. Your opinion? I agree with you, Tamaz. I think it should have professional training. The existing training is stopping. That's what it seems like. 10.4 is stopping. Going forward, we'll see. With the new version of Final Cut Pro 10, whether that's 10.5, whether that's Final Cut Pro 11, whatever they want to call it, I just can't see zero support from Apple in regards to training. I can't see it. Look, Premiere has training, very successful training. When I see Premiere classes, they're packed, sometimes hundreds of people at NAB. It's probably the most popular NLE training that there is Premiere. Why is that? No, well, there's a couple reasons. One of them is Premiere is in a lot of schools. It's in high schools. It's in colleges. The other thing is there's a lot of jobs for Premiere editors out there. So that's one of the reasons. Avid has training. They have training. Resolve has training. I think somebody said Resolve training is even free. So one of the criticisms of Apple training in the past is it's too expensive. Well, it might be. So lowering the price would be fine. Lowering the price. I would say Apple should have a free course of official training, a free tier that could lead you on to a paid tier. That's what I think. Apple, the same way that you had a group of people talking to you about the Mac Pro, get a group of us trainers. I'm volunteering myself. I will certainly help with a new training program. Get a group of us trainers together and listen to our ideas, how to make a new training lessons for Final Cut Pro, a new version going forward. You did it with the Mac Pro. You changed the iPhone. The iPhone stopped being thinner, and it came back with the Pro version with Pro cameras, and it came thicker with the bigger battery. Same with the MacBook Pro. First off, get the training away from third parties. There's no reason why your training should be in the hands of a third party. You should do it yourself. Do it in-house. Hire some trainers to help if you want. Hire me. I'll give you a hand. The idea that a new version of Final Cut Pro comes out with zero official training, that would be disappointing to me. I think to a lot of people. I just don't see it. Now, will it come out right away? Maybe not. Might take a year or so. We'll see. I would be surprised if there is no training going forward. If there's no training going forward from Apple, then it's just a big nebulous cloud of training on YouTube and people doing their own thing. There has to be some organization. I think that there will be a new version of training for Final Cut Pro with a new version of Final Cut Pro. I think both things will happen. Can you imagine Apple saying, oh, we're going to turn the Final Cut Pro development team over to a third party? Can you imagine that? Well, that's what they did with the training. Not Apple. Once again, this is not Apple, the main Apple. This is not the Final Cut Pro team. There's a specific part of Apple, the training section, that somehow they thought it might be effective. I don't know. I have no idea. But it wasn't effective. It wasn't very good. I refused to sign the contract that they had. I still am a trainer. I still passed the trainer exam and on all that. But I refuse to sign a contract. Get it away from third-party people. So going forward, what would you like to see as training, official training from Apple? You can let them know. Go to the FCPX team, FCPX.tv. Let me pull that up here and just give them feedback. I don't know how to get training feedback, so send it to the team. Let me see. px.tv. So let's see here. Let me pull this up. If you go to FCPX.tv, right here, you can send a request or feedback to the FCPX team. Now, like I said, they don't, you click on that and it goes right there. And they don't, the team itself, I think, has little to do with the training. They might tell them, if there's an update to Final Cut Pro, here's what you got to update, but there doesn't seem to be much communication between those two. I know people on both, and it doesn't seem to be much communication. But anyway, let them know. So the other thing is, just because they're getting rid of this training for 10.4, it doesn't have any reflection on Final Cut Pro 10 itself. Some people think, oh, they're going to stop the training. They're going to stop Final Cut Pro 10. No. I don't see any connection between those two. Zero connection. The training program has not been successful. It has in the past. It has in the past, just not recently. It hasn't been successful. So let me just pull this up. Let me just check here. I think we're okay. So Jean-Baptiste says, yes, training for Resolve is free on their website. Well, Apple could fund some free training for their Final Cut Pro users, right? You just go into Tim Cook's couch and get some of the change in his cushions, and you can fund it. Here's the thing. Apple came out with the Mac Pro. What's the Mac Pro for? It's not for surfing the web. I mean, you can do that, but it's not for surfing the web. It's for, I'd say number one is for Final Cut Pro. It's for professional video editors. That's a lot of the people that Apple had in the session when they developed the Mac Pro. That's who it was designed for, right? It was. It was designed for. So like I said, Avid has it. So Resolve has free training on their website. So that's Final Cut Pro Intense is I'll take your training. Well, you know what? If there's a gap between 10.4 and the new version of Final Cut Pro training, I might do some training. Have to see. But they have to be probably writing a new book at this point and new courseware. Listen, so we have the drop the training altogether. That's one of the, some people think they're just dropping it altogether. I don't think that. I think they're dropping the existing training. I think they're dropping the model. I think they're dropping the third-party involvement with it. But I think, it would make sense they would continue to have more training going forward. It doesn't make sense to not have official training. Paula says, I will join you in D.C. And Nathan says, you said June, right? That's correct. It's the current exams and course are retiring in June. So if 10.5 comes out before that, if 10.5 comes out between now and NAB, which is in April, maybe there's a new version of training at that point. Not the existing model. The existing model doesn't work. You don't need a third-party company doing it. Unless it was like Ripple training or something. So Rick Allen says, I gave up on being an act as an Apple certified trainer last year. LearnQuest was too difficult to work with. They wanted me to have a $1 million liability insurance policy just to train at my local center. This is part of the problem. I wouldn't sign that contract. There's no way in heck I was going to sign their contract. No, not going to do it. Years back and forth, we went back and forth. So plenty of time for an overlapping announcement. The only thing is, Nathan, that typically there's been a year or 18 months between versions of Final Cut Pro before they had new training announced, before they retired the old version and had new training available. So that's interesting that they didn't do that this time. Once again, listen, Apple does manage expectations sometimes. They did it with the Mac Pro. They had a preview at WWDC. They said there's a new version of Final Cut Pro coming out in the fall. When the Mac Pro, in the fall, they updated that and said the Mac Pro is going to be out in December, which is technically the fall. A new version of Final Cut Pro came out in October, 10.4.7, specifically for the Mac Pro, months before the Mac Pro was released. Then 10.4.8 came out in December, which was a minor update. They manage expectations. They know how to do it. The fact that 10.4, Final Cut Pro 10.4, is 26 months old at this point. 26 months. Let me see here. Well, I'm sorry. It's not 26 months. It's 2 years, 1 month, 29 days since Final Cut Pro 10.4 was released. Almost 2 years. Almost 26 months. 2 years, 1 month, 29 days. It'll be 26 months in a couple of days. Alex Gallner says there's a chance that the version that will be eventually come out has been tested as a beta since November 2018. I agree with you, Alex. People think that they start on the next version after like 10.4.7 came out. Okay, and then 10.4.8 came out. Okay, now we're going to start on 10.5. No, I'm sure that's not the way it works. They probably have an idea of 10.5 back when they started 10.4. 10.5 has probably been, if it is 10.5, I'm just guessing about the name. There is a new version coming out. Hopefully it'll be 10.5 or something great. They started on that probably when 10.4 started, or before they started on 10.5. They can work parallel tracks of Final Cut Pro development at one time. For example, what was it that came out in 10.4.7? The whatever it was called, the 0.2, the things that sped Final Cut Pro up, the new underpinnings. That's one section of the Final Cut Pro team. But there's other sections that are continuously doing things. People that are looking at the interface, people that are looking at new features, people that are doing a lot of things. They're all working at the same time, not just one single thing at once. They're working multiple layers. So I think Final Cut Pro 10.5 / whatever the new version is called, has been in development for years, since 10.4 came out. Tamaz says, in my opinion, Apple is preparing something new for the new version of Final Cut Pro. I do not believe that there will be no official training because their lack would be the first step of getting rid of the Pro by name. So I think the same thing. I think there will be a new training system put in place at some point. It may not be out at the exact same time as the new version of Final Cut Pro comes out, but it'll be worked on shortly. Listen, if Apple, like I said, they talk to the people about the Mac Pro, talk to us trainers about the training program. Your last version didn't work. Mobile Me didn't work. iTunes didn't work. Whatever else they have, there's things that fail, then they get a new version and try it again. I was just going to ask who beta test Final Cut Pro. I've been wondering that. It's impressive that nothing ever really seems to get leaked out on like most betas. Well, they have a good team. Excuse me. A good team of beta testers. I am not one, and I don't want to be one, because if I was a beta tester, I couldn't be talking to you about Final Cut Pro. I couldn't talk about Final Cut Pro on Final Cut Pro Radio. I couldn't come on these live things and talk about it. So I don't want to be a beta tester. I'm not interested. Plus, I like Christmas. I like Christmas coming out. Hey, a new version of Final Cut Pro. Speaking of that, let's check the App Store. Just for the heck of it. Updates. I only see Pixelmator Pro at this point. That's it. So, no update. Pauline says, I doubt 10.5 exists. I suspect that the 10X project has been canceled and the new version is different. The old training is impossible to update. Oh, I think 10.5 exists. Whether that's, like you said, it could be called whatever they want to call it. I don't care. I think at some point they're going to have a new version of the app. Parallel storylines, Richard. Yes, parallel. Nathan says, how frustrating and funny it must be for those in the know to watch us debate these things. Listen, Nathan, I agree, and they can take care of that by making an announcement. All they have to do is say, hey, we got a new version of Final Cut Pro coming out. We're going to try to have it out by NAB. We'll let you know as things progress. Because they do it with some things. They did it with the Mac Pro. They did it with the iMac Pro. Remember, they announced the iMac Pro once again. They pre-announced it at WWDC. It came out in December of that year. So they were managing those expectations about the Mac Pro. They were managing expectations about the iMac Pro. They pre-announced a version of Final Cut Pro last year around NAB for the fall. It came out. They pre-announced it. They can manage expectations when they want to. Alex Gollner says if they are testing collaboration features in Final Cut with teams, they will have the opportunity to test a new documentation system with the teams. That's correct. Alex says, I updated my backup Mac today to Catalina in case 10.5 requires it. Yes, I didn't update my old 2017 iMac or my 2019 MacBook Pro to Catalina. I had them both on Mojave. But the Mac Pro that I have came with Catalina, and it's been working fine. Everything's been fine. Logic runs, Final Cut Pro runs, everything seems to be working fine. So Greg Lee says, can you give us a recap for those who joined late? I can give you a quick recap. So basically, you can also watch the rerun. It's on YouTube, Facebook, and Periscope Live. Basically this. Apple training, there's Apple certified training. There's two levels of it. There's certified training for the end user, and there's certified training for trainers. I'm a certified trainer for trainer. I've been since version 10.5. No, I've been a certified trainer since Final Cut Pro version 5, not version 10.5, since version 5. So I've been a trainer for version 5, version 6, version 7, and then 10.0, 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, and 10.4. I've been a certified trainer for that. Normally, when they announce a new version of Final Cut, about a year later, they will retire the old training and retire the old exams. What has happened this time is Apple, once again, this is not Apple official. This is the training portion of Apple. They announced that in June, they are retiring the Final Cut Pro 10.4 training, retiring the Final Cut Pro 10.4 exams. What's different about that? There's nothing to replace them. So many think that's the end of training. It could be the end of training. I think that would be a big mistake on Apple's part, misjudging their clientele. I don't think so, though. I think that's the end of existing training. The program that exists now is ending. If a new version of Final Cut Pro comes out, well, not if, when a new version of Final Cut Pro comes out, we're expecting it anytime in 2020, between now and NAB. I hope they have it out by NAB. NAB is a great place to be showing off a new version of Final Cut Pro. They have in the past. They've had their own little classrooms and showed off. The team was there. Maybe it's dramatically different from 10.4. New training would be necessary, but I think they're just abandoning the current program. I would be surprised if there's no official training for a new version of Final Cut Pro. Now, here's the thing. I think they should give away some training for free. I think Apple should have a tier of official Apple training that you either take online or you take at the Apple stores. They're all over the United States. There's one in Columbia, Maryland here, one in Towson, Maryland. There's two of them within about 35, 40 minutes from me. Take a class there. Get Apple certified at that level. And if you wanted to continue, you could go to Future Media Concepts or another place and get a higher level of Apple training. Apple used to have two levels of certification. They had level 1 and level 2. They stopped and consolidated that, I suspect because the classes weren't that well attended. They had it for Final Cut Pro 7. I had both levels of training for Final Cut Pro 7. I was a certified trainer for both levels. They had it for Final Cut Pro 10 initially, but they stopped that. So they had different levels. So I think Apple should offer a free level to get Apple end user certification. This is one level. If you want to go beyond that, you have to go to the classes and take the classes. I taught those classes. I taught them at Boston University when they had a campus down in Georgetown in Washington. And I would sit in front of the class, I would stand in front of the class and teach 8 hours a day for 3 days. 8 hours a day for 3 days, sometimes 2 days, sometimes 3 days. I taught Wolf Blitzer's editors one weekend because they couldn't come in during the week. So we had a weekend class. It was customized for their editors. They had some interesting stories to tell. So let's see what we have. Who asked if a trainer is certified anymore? I expect certification will only be relevant in education for teachers and those supplying educational institutions. Well, a trainer is not the general public version of certification. That's the people who teach certification. So a trainer certification, you have to be Apple certified trainer in order to teach a certified class for Apple. You have to be. The trainer certification, you have to be accepted into the program. You have to have prior teaching experience. And you have to have a proficiency in Final Cut Pro. You have to pass the test that you'll be teaching. You have to pass that as well. There's a bunch of things. The end user certification, it's not a matter of only having a slip of paper. It's not just about that. It's giving yourself confidence in using the program. If you go into the job the first day, and if you've had training certification, you're more confident a lot of times. You've already had a lot, especially if it's your first job. If it's not your first job, that doesn't really apply. But if it's your first job going in as a video editor, you've had training, you've had experience, you've done some of your own videos, family videos, videos for church, whatever. Is it necessary? It's not absolutely necessary, but there should be a program, in my opinion, in place for any new version of Final Cut Pro. I will say this, Nathan says, I don't expect the app to get a major overhaul like 2011 simply because of the recent metal coating. Why put that rewrite effort in if you're about to do a major change anyway? I disagree with you. I think the Metal 2, first off, Metal's been supported in Final Cut Pro for a while. It didn't just come in September or October when the Metal 2 came. It's been there for a while. They updated it to Metal 2. That's not the Final Cut Pro team. That's the Metal team that's doing some stuff in the application itself. There's other layers that are developing Final Cut Pro. That's like the plumbing in your house. It's not the electrical. It's not the drywall. It's not the carpeting. It's not the roof. It's not the appliances in the kitchen. It's just the plumbing. All those other things are happening simultaneously, I'm sure. So I think absolutely there's going to be a major, major version. Why else would it take 26 months to come out? 10.2 to 10.3, 10.3 to 10.4, 10.1 to 10.2, 14 months, 18 months, 16 months. Now we're at 26 months. There's some things going on. I think it's going to be major. Whatever it might be changed. Look, if they incorporated some kind of collaboration like people are talking about, that's pretty major. That's major. So that could be what's going on. Alex Gallner says maybe Final Cut Pro Plus, Final Cut as a service, will include free training and free help from a real person. They certainly could have, I agree, they could have some kind of a online Final Cut Pro help system. Apple should incorporate something like that. Pauline says LearnQuest are still selling training and makes zero mention of the end of the training. There's no reason to mention the end of the training. There's no version to go beyond that. That if you want to get trained in Final Cut Pro, go ahead and get trained in it. It's not. Is it going to hurt you? No, it's not going to hurt you. You know, Final Cut Pro 10.4 is valuable to be trained in. Greg Lee says, thanks for the clarification. Alex Gallner says, Nathan, higher-ups at Apple may have forced the Final Cut team to make the hardware and software compatibility updates for the Mac hardware and Mac OS team. Yes, I think that Alex and I are on the same page with that. So this fall, I was expecting an update to Final Cut Pro around the FCPX Creative Summit. Didn't happen. But at the same time, the Mac Pro was coming out. At the same time, Metal 2 was introduced in the Final Cut Pro. At the same time, Catalina was out. The Final Cut Pro team does not work in isolation. They also have to work with what Apple tells them. So I think they would like to have a Final Cut Pro version, new version out around the summit. I'm sure they would. Just like I think they'll want to have a new version of Final Cut Pro around NAB this year. Hopefully that's going to happen at NAB. That's what everybody's hoping for. OGDC says, impressive. Wolf Blitzer had some wonderful editors. If I'm not mistaken, that was Final Cut Pro 7. Yeah, I think I taught them Final Cut Pro 7 for a weekend. But it wasn't, they had some interesting stories. They used to go live to air from the Final Cut Pro 7 timeline. Not rendered, just play back the timeline and go live to air. That's pretty brave. Let's put it that way. Nathan says, good point, Richard and Alex. Absolutely. So once again, I don't think, I agree with Alex. I think there's something happened this fall. It mixed everything up. The OS, Metal 2, the Mac Pro coming out imminently, and they got mixed up and they couldn't get the Final Cut Pro perhaps update that they wanted to. Look, do you think they only have one version of an update available at any given time? So when 10.4.7 came out, could they have put features in there? Sure, they could have. But they wanted to save them for 10.5 for some reason, whatever they wanted to do. 10.4 came out. 10.4 came out and stuff. Let me see what this is. Much Ado About Nothing, not till June, implies WWDC intro. Final Cut Pro is not a WWDC item. Very rarely is Final Cut Pro mentioned at WWDC, only with hardware. So NAB, that's where Final Cut Pro should be. It's professional. It's the biggest event for professional video and audio in the world. IBC is probably second over in Europe. But I agree as far as Much Ado About Nothing, as far as the cancellation of the classes, I'm not that concerned about it. I don't see any relationship. I agree with you, Eric. I don't see any relationship between the cancellation. Well, they don't call it cancellation. They call it retiring. Retiring 10.4. I don't see any relation between retiring the 10.4 course, retiring the 10.4 certification, and Final Cut itself. I don't see any relation between those two. So, do I think it affects Final Cut Pro? No, I don't think it affects them at all. I think Final Cut Pro is going to still on schedule, and they will come out as they're supposed to, with training of some sort at some point. We'll have to see. Alex Gallner says iPad OS 13, iOS 13 were much more buggy and may have caused problems in Final Cut Pro 10.5 development. There you go. It's another reason. Pauline says, if you look at the schedules of WWDC, Pro Apps has not been mentioned. The only time I've seen Pro Apps mentioned at WWDC is that in relation to hardware, iMac Pro, the Mac Pro. Alex Gallner says, could be that the iPad version will be announced at WWDC with new App Store rules to encourage developers to make apps that are more expensive for iPads. That's interesting idea. Well, there'll be something at WWDC, but I think. Listen, let's go back to this. 2 years, 1 month, 29 days since 10.4 came out. That's a long time in development of full version numbers of Final Cut Pro. Even if you go back to 10.4.4, which was announced in 2018 once again at the FCPX Creative Summit, all these major feature updates for Final Cut Pro are announced around NAB or around the Final Cut Pro Creative Summit, with the exception of 10.1. They've all been announced around one of those two events. NAB's coming up. I expect the update to Final Cut Pro. Now, here's the thing. As I've mentioned before, we're still in February. We're only February the 12th. I expect if there's going to be a Final Cut Pro presentation at NAB, it'll be announced within a week, 2 weeks, by the end of February, beginning of March. They'll make an announcement at that point. Somebody will, whoever's putting it on. Haven't seen anything, haven't been able to find anything out yet, but it's still early. We'll find out. So are we satisfied with the retiring, quote-unquote retiring, of the Final Cut Pro 10.4 documentations? Do you have any more questions about that? I mean certification, not documentation. The Final Cut Pro certification. I don't see them related to Final Cut Pro itself. I think they're completely separate little parts of Apple. The Final Cut Pro team, it just does what it does, and the certification will get their information from the team when they need it. But there's, like I said, the certification and the classes have been parsed out to a third party. Pauline says, I am fine, just cannot wait for any news. Absolutely, you and me both. We're all anxious, aren't we, for Final Cut Pro, the new version, whatever this is going to be. It's going to be 10.5. It's going to be whatever. I mean, Michael Choney came on and said maybe they should rename it. When a new app comes out, rename it so you get rid of the original Final Cut Pro negative press that it got. We'll see. We will see. So Final Cut Pro 10.5, what do you expect? Final Cut Pro in 10 might be a play on words. They might announce a new kind of training for all pro apps. They could. Now, once again, within the existing training model, they dropped motion training a while ago. But I don't expect motion to be that popular. I mean, I know it's, Alex is one, other people use it to make plugins, and it's very, very powerful. But by and large, I don't think it was that popular. Rick Allen Lippert says, at the second Final Cut Pro Creative Summit, I asked the head of the team about an iPad version. He looked stunned and asked me what I've heard. Who was I talking to? It's been a while ago, right, Rick? I mean, the second summit was 2016, I think. I think I was there. Well, as the official course workbook, consider getting Rick Young's update of the Final Cut book, which was released last summer. There you go, Alex Gallner says. Yes, that'll be fine. I think, once again, Apple, assemble a group of Final Cut Pro trainers to help you develop a new Final Cut Pro course. I volunteer. You can contact me. I will help with that. There's Rick Young's book, The Focal Easy Guide to Final Cut Pro 10, 3rd edition. There you go. So everybody's excited about Final Cut Pro, the new version coming out. It's coming out in 2020. I'm certain of that. That's not a guess. That's not a guess. People all the time say this. They say this cliche. Those that know can't say, and those that say don't know. Right? There are people who are not under NDA that know things. Period. That is a fact. That's a third level of that old cliche. What's your contact info? I want to go there. I want to go to there. You can go to here. You can go to here. FCPRadio.com and click the contact link. You can also just click the link for Facebook or Twitter, either one of those. Either one of those will be fine. I'm on Twitter all the time. Rick Allen says, yes, I told them my first impressions of Final Cut Pro 10, the day it dropped in 2011, that it was designed for an iPad. It sure seems like some of the icons and stuff, you want to touch them, right? Touch them and drag them, some of them. I think it would be good to have both, touching and dragging and the mouse. Alex says, people who test Final Cut Pro have signed an NDA, which includes that you can't say you've signed an NDA. I can say that I haven't signed an NDA. That's correct. We can both say we have not signed NDAs. However, once again, there's people that know things that have not signed an NDA. I'm not saying that they blab. I'm just saying there's just people that know things besides people who have signed an NDA. Excited about your training. I appreciate you. Thank you very much. I didn't say I was going to train. I said if there's no training when new version of Final Cut Pro comes out, I will consider doing some training, especially once Apple drops the official training. So here's the thing. You cannot say it's Apple certified training if you're just training individuals and stuff. You can't say that. I would not say that. As soon as I can't say whether I signed an NDA, it is likely that I have. This is canary in the coal mine method of letting people know. Apple does that, don't they? They do that with the request from the government about things. They did that. So if there are any more questions, once again, don't worry about the fact that the training has stopped. That doesn't mean that Final Cut Pro development has stopped, that they're not related. Those two things are not related. Final Cut Pro team, I doubt if they even talked to the other team. So Nathan says, we'll keep asking you guys if you can or cannot say you signed an NDA. Here's the thing, Nathan, with me. If I was involved with Final Cut Pro beta team, how can I come on here and talk about Final Cut Pro? I couldn't. I couldn't talk about a future version of Final Cut Pro. I couldn't come on here and say, I think there's going to be a new version around NAB. I couldn't come on and say, I think we should have these features. I couldn't even talk about it. I prefer doing these. I prefer Final Cut Pro Radio. Speaking of Final Cut Pro Radio, we have FCPRadio.com. The last one we had was Robert Kruger from Kino, which is really good. He talks about Kino, the new version of Kino, 1.7, I think. 1.8 is supposed to be out. It's going to have BRAW support. Two big things about the version of Kino. Number one, BRAW support is coming. Number two is that it can detect legacy media. If you're in Catalina, it will detect and convert legacy media. Two big things for Final Cut Pro users. Kino, highly recommended. So we had Chris Hawking from Command Post on. He did a great thing. And we had the FCPX Creative Summit Part 1 and Part 2. Alex was on that, talking about what happened at the Creative Summit. One of the consistent things I keep hearing from people as far as requests for a new version of Final Cut Pro is BRAW support. I hear it all the time. Here's a couple of big ticket items for a version of Final Cut Pro. BRAW support. Do I want it? Yes. Do I use BRAW? No, I don't. I want it for the people that request it. I want it for some people that use and shoot in BRAW. It's requested all the time. The other thing is the collaboration in Final Cut Pro that's not there. Once again, I am a single editor editing at my studio. I don't use collaboration. I used it with Brad Olson. We used Frame.io and some other things when we edited the Off the Tracks Final Cut Pro documentary, but I haven't used collaboration since then. Do I want it? Yes. I want it for the people that want collaboration. Those are big deals. I also want some other things too. I want a lot of other things. But for Sean Lander, he wants, what does he want? I can't remember what he wanted. Somebody tell me what Sean wants. Dupe detection, of course. I can say for a fact that the Final Cut Pro team knows about dupe detection requests. They know about it, so I'm sure Sean has sent it in a few times. Anyway, I think we're pretty well done here. What do you guys think? Is there any other questions we have going forward? So like I said, Apple, talk to the trainers about training going forward. Those are your experts. Those are the people you should be talking to. Don't worry about third-party people. Dupe detection is another one. I could use that myself. So some of the features that Hollywood and high-end production facilities want, I'm sure would benefit a whole tier of Final Cut Pro editors, right? Speech to text. They have that kind of in OS X, right? Right now, they have that. They have to incorporate it. I'd like to see the ability to open up a PDF or text file inside of Final Cut Pro as it is. Logic has a notes field. You can type notes and things right in the actual application itself. But I think any company, carbonated drink, I switched to carbonated drinks, ice, it's carbonated. Any company that deals with requests for their app, a big company like Apple, I'm sure they catalog them, right? They catalog the request. They see which requests are very popular. They see which requests might introduce a feature that they hadn't thought of that they think is a good idea. And they prioritize everything. So as far as Hollywood and Final Cut Pro 10, yes, I'm sure Hollywood is a category. Hollywood features is a category that they pay attention to. But they're going to pay attention to it probably proportionately to everything else. There's lots of other editors. Hollywood's a very, very small, albeit important, section of Final Cut Pro editors. But there's plenty of other editors that are not going to really care about some of the things Hollywood cares about. They have to do a balancing act of those things. Some things will benefit dupe detection. That'll benefit a lot of people, including Hollywood, including other editors, including documentary editors, including wedding editors. That's one of those features that takes care of a lot of Final Cut Pro editors. So Final Cut Pro in 10, thanks for the update. I'll finish my cert, going to join the certified fold while it lasts. It's certainly not going to hurt you any. Like I said, I was the post-production supervisor, lead video editor at the National Archives for 8 years in Washington, D.C. And I hired 2 editors. I hired some other techs down there too, AV techs. But when I hired editors, if I had editors that were equal, one had certification, one didn't, and they were equal in all their regards, I would hire the one with the certification. That's a little step up and above. Is it absolutely required? No. I can watch an editor their first day at work and see if they knew what they were doing in Final Cut Pro. But they were always on, they always were on a temporary basis and for a while anyway. So let's see here. All right, so I think we're pretty good. Once again, just because the FCPX official 10.4 training is being retired, don't worry about Final Cut Pro in that regard. Final Cut Pro is, I'm sure it's strong. I'm sure we're going to have a great version coming out by NAB, hopefully. Before NAB, right before, in March. March will be here in a couple weeks. So anytime between now and NAB, a new version of Final Cut Pro could drop. Let me just check the App Store while I got you all here. I like to check it. No, nothing yet. Pixelmator Pro, I updated this morning. Just like to refresh it. Let's look up Final Cut Pro. Nope. Still at the old version. 248. Came out in December. .248 came out in December. We'll be fine for a while. At any point, it could be coming out. Let me just check. Oh, let me check here. I don't see anything else. I think we're going to, let me see here. I think we're good for today. But once again, don't worry about the Final Cut Pro training retiring in June. First off, we have 4 months to get a new version of Final Cut Pro out. Of course, Alex joking says 10.5.1 has been available in the UK for a few hours now. I doubt that. Just joking, of course. So that's a good point. Eric Emmerich says it communicates a commitment to the craft, the training he's talking about. Well, listen, the idea, suppose a brand new version of Final Cut Pro came out and there was no training for it? I don't think so. I think there's going to be some training. It could, whether they switch it up, they bring it in-house, they talk to us trainers. Once again, Apple, talk to us trainers, get a group of us trainers together. We'll give you some ideas about how to effectively make a training program. Heck, I'll help you write the book. I'll help you write the training manual. That's not a problem. Not a problem at all. But anyway, everybody, whoever's going to be, I think Alex is going to be at NAB. Alex, you're coming to NAB this year, right? I think I read somewhere that you are. I very likely will be, as long as there is a Final Cut Pro announcement or whatever. I'll probably go. I'm likely. Alex says he will be at NAB. Good deal. There's no Guru gathering this year. What are we going to do on, is it Monday night? I think it was Monday night. Everything switched around. You will always get something from Ripple Training. That's true. They will have something out, but this is Apple certified training. Alex says, let's have a raffle. Who comes closest to the date? Well, that's an interesting bet. I guess I wouldn't bet on the date. I don't know the date. I just know the year. Alex says, Super Meet is on Tuesday. Yeah, and this year it's close to the convention center. It's right above the convention center, so you can actually probably walk from the convention center to the Super Meet, or there's actually a what do they call that? The Las Vegas, it's not the Metro. Whatever the train is, the driverless train has a stop at the hotel where the Super Meet is, as well as I think the next stop is actually the convention center. So that'll be great. So I just got an award from Restream.io. Congratulations, you've received 100 messages today with Restream Chat. This has been very chatty. Everybody wants to know about them dropping the certified training. Once again, they just retired it, which is a normal thing that they do. They always retire their training. The difference is there's no new version to take its place. I'm glad if they're retiring the model that they have presently for training. That would be good. And then they have to do something else with a new version of Final Cut Pro. We'll see what happens. Anything else? I think that's about it from my end of things. My name is Richard Taylor, if you don't know. FinalCutProRadio.com. Podcast, Final Cut Pro Radio Podcast. So the podcast, my podcast, I've been podcasting for 15 years. I started podcasting before Apple had podcast in the store, in the iTunes store. We are just about at 1.2 million downloads of my podcasts. If you want to follow along on YouTube, which some of you probably are, youtube.com Richard Taylor TV, Facebook, facebook.com Richard Taylor TV, FCPRadio.com, of course, that's where the main page is for the radio show. Also, FCPX.TV. Right now, over there, I have first off, I have send your request or feedback to the FCPX team. Here's a link right on the main page. I have all these articles about the Mac Pro, 60 plus articles about the Mac Pro. I used the model that Ken Stone used, if you guys remember him. He used to have a list of articles all over the web. That's what I like. A clean interface, no ads anywhere, not a bunch of nonsense pop-ups and stuff on there. Black text on white background, links all over the place. FCPX, all things Final Cut Pro 10. I'm going to be expanding from what I have now. But anyway, on the top of the page, you can always send your request. Just click on that. At some point, this is going to say Final Cut Pro 10.5. Doesn't yet, but it will at some point. Hopefully sooner than later. Thanks, everybody. I will be seeing you later. My name is Richard Taylor. I'm going to be getting out of here and getting some work done. I have some editing to do on some projects. If there's anything that happens with Final Cut Pro, any breaking news, I will jump back on one of these live streams. I'll announce it on Twitter. I'll announce it on Facebook. If you want to join our Facebook group, it's facebook.com/groups/Final Cut Pro Radio. You can join us over there to discuss that. On Twitter, Richard Taylor TV, Facebook, Richard Taylor TV, and YouTube, Richard Taylor TV. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. I will talk to you the next time we go live. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.